Award-winning Kuwaiti-American journalist Ahmed Shahabuddin, who has contributed to PBS, Al Jazeera, Huffington Post, and the New York Times, was arrested on March 3rd during a brief visit to Kuwait, according to the Committee to Protect Journalists. As of now, he is still detained there. He is reportedly charged with spreading false information, harming national security, and misusing his mobile phone. Now, just prior to his detention, Shahabuddin had commented publicly on videos and images related to the Iran war. His recent posts included this geolocated video verified by CNN showing a U.S. fighter jet crash near a U.S. airbase in Kuwait. And just days after his arrest, Kuwait enacted a new law imposing prison sentences for up to 10 years for anyone who, quote, disseminates news, publishes statements, or spreads false rumors related to military entities with the intent of undermining confidence in them. Now, for a lot of American journalists, this hits close to home. I've known Ahmed for almost 2 decades. He's also friends with our colleague, Jacob Soboroff, who wrote on X, "This is horrific. Ahmed is a kind, caring, and wonderful human being. Free Ahmed." Ahmed has not posted online since his detainment, and his social media accounts appear to be deleted. Joining us now is Jody Ginsberg, CEO of the Committee to Protect Journalists organization, which launched a petition demanding Ahmed Shahabuddin be released immediately. Jody, it's good to have you back on the show. Unfortunate that it is under these circumstances. But let me just start with the basics. Do you have any new information about Ahmed's arrest, the legal proceedings that are pending, and any news about what's at stake for him and his family?
Unfortunately, very little news. What we know, what we understand to have happened is, as you say, that he was detained on March the 3rd. That's nearly 7 weeks ago. And that is following increase in restrictions on freedom of expression that we've seen in Kuwait and also a number of Gulf countries in response to the Iran war. And it's extremely troubling. Kuwait has introduced a number of restrictions that have severe penalties, up to 10 years in jail and severe fines for people who breach these new laws that include a very vague undermining of the prestige of the military. And of course, Kuwait has been criticized by bodies like the UN Committee Against Torture for malpractice against those in custody, including the use of torture and extreme punishment. So we're extremely worried about him.
Jody, what has the State Department done to date? Have they been engaged? Have they been using the full muscle of American diplomacy to try to bring Ahmed home to America?
It's a good question. Well, the State Department have said they're aware of the case, that the U.S. has no higher priority than the safety and security of Americans. But as yet, Ahmed has not been designated as wrongfully detained, and that's a really important designation. A few years ago, the U.S. introduced something called the Levinson Act, which allows for the State Department to designate people as wrongfully detained, and that unleashes a much stronger response from the U.S. government. It allows them to negotiate much more directly and allows them to impose sanctions against countries that have been involved in wrongfully detaining U.S. citizens. So we think that he meets the criteria for this wrongful detention designation, and we strongly urge the State Department to designate Ahmed as wrongfully detained.
Jody, the last time you came onto the show, it was to discuss the growing numbers of journalists who have been killed in Gaza, and I believe the count is now at 262, according to your organization. I'm wondering if you can speak to the broader climate of what has happened to journalists on the front lines of these stories right now, but over the last several years as well.
Well, as I've said to you before, now is the most dangerous time in the world to be a journalist. Of course, Gaza has been the deadliest place in the world for journalists. Israel has deliberately targeted journalists. Hundreds of journalists have been killed by Israel during the genocide in Gaza. But more broadly, we're seeing many, many more attacks in more places, including in the United States, against journalists. The smearing of journalists by those in power, the use of legal threats against journalists, the detention of journalists, record numbers of journalists in jail in recent years. And in response to the Iran war in particular, we've seen a slew of new legislations and increased censorship censorship in the MENA region, in the Middle East region, but also in countries more broadly. We've even heard attempted restrictions here in the United States. So it is an incredibly challenging time to be a journalist, and Ahmed's case is emblematic of that.
I'd love to hear you talk a little bit more about the threats to press freedom here in the United States, particularly since I think of the United States historically as having been a great defender of press freedoms, not only because of our First Amendment here in the United States, but because it is a value that we have promoted elsewhere around the world. So I'm curious to what extent you think the examples that you characterized before happening in the United States, smears of journalists, threats to journalists, et cetera, may be emboldening the treatment of reporters elsewhere in the world.
I think there's absolutely no doubt that the kinds of attacks we're seeing on the press here in the United States is emboldening those elsewhere. If you have a president who calls journalists enemies of the people, if you have a president that issues lawsuits against the press, receives restrictions on journalists, throws journalists out of the White House press pool, restricts journalists in the Pentagon, other countries look to that. And as you say, it's really important. The US has a long history of defending free press, both at home and abroad. And of course, as we saw in previous detained cases for US citizens, including Evan Gershkovich, the Wall Street Journal reporter detained in Russia, has been at the forefront of fighting for US citizens who have been persecuted and prosecuted for exercising their freedom of the press. And we very much hope that that will be the case with Ahmed as well.
So, Jody, when you look at what is happening across the Gulf, Iran, the U.S., there is no doubt that it's harder and harder to get information and a better understanding of what's happening. Iran obviously has cut off the internet to the outside world. The only reliable information that comes out of there is hardly reliable because it's all state-controlled media. Israel has very strict military censorship. The Gulf countries are limiting and restricting anyone who posts any information about it, not exactly free press in those countries. And as you mentioned right now, the media in this country also, albeit free to report on the war, not having access to get inside Iran, but also we have our own restrictions at the Pentagon as to who can report on the Pentagon without signing various documents. It's a difficult time to be a journalist, but just talk to us about this specific war with the Iran war and how that impedes our ability to understand what is actually happening on the ground in all of these countries that are affected by it.
Well, one thing it's important to remember, of course, is that almost inevitably during a war, we see countries try to impose restrictions in the name of national security. And almost always that doesn't just target genuine national security issues, but ends up covering a broad range of issues that are essential for us to understand what's happening. You mentioned the blackouts that we have in Iran, making it incredibly difficult to know what's happening. Their censorship of individuals just simply for posting other verified accounts, as we believe happened in Ahmed's case. That makes it extremely difficult for us as ordinary citizens to understand what is happening. That's why we need journalists. We need journalists on the ground who can be our eyes and ears when we can't get into these places and see for ourselves so that we can understand what's happening.
Jody Ginsberg, thank you for all of your efforts to help the press around the world.